The rain came down like bullets from heaven, each drop hitting the dry Arizona ground with the force of a small stone. Rebecca stood at her kitchen window, watching the storm tear across her land. The wind howled through the gaps in her wooden fence, making sounds like angry spirits. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The house felt too big and too empty, like it always did since Thomas died. 6 months had passed since that terrible day when the rattlesnake got him, but the loneliness still hit her like a punch to the stomach every morning when she woke up. The thunder crashed overhead, shaking the windows in their frames. Lightning lit up the sky for a split second, showing her the mess the storm was making of her property. Fence posts lay scattered like broken teeth. Her chicken coop had lost its roof completely. Rebecca sighed and turned away from the window. She had bigger problems than a storm. The banknote was due in 2 weeks and she didn't have the money. Thomas had been behind on payments before he died, and now the debt was crushing her like a boulder on her chest. The neighbors weren't helping either. Every week someone would ride up to her door with an offer to buy her land. The offers were always insultingly low, barely enough to pay off half her debts. They all knew she was desperate, and they were like vultures circling a dying animal. Another crash of thunder made her jump. This storm was worse than usual. She lit an oil lamp and settled into her rocking chair with some mending, trying to ignore the chaos outside. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. It was low and deep, almost like a groan of pain. Rebecca froze, needle halfway through a torn shirt. There it was again. Definitely not the wind. She set down her mending and walked back to the window. Lightning flashed, and for a moment she thought she saw something dark near the creek. Something that looked like it might be a person. Probably just a fallen tree branch, she told herself. But the sound came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there in the storm, and they were hurt. Rebecca grabbed her coat and the oil lamp. She knew it was dangerous to go outside during such a violent storm, but she couldn't ignore someone in need. That wasn't how she was raised. The wind tried to rip the coat right off her back as soon as she stepped outside. Rain soaked through to her skin in seconds. She held the lamp high and fought her way toward the creek, stumbling over debris and mud. The lightning helped her see better than the weak lamplight. Each flash showed her a little more of what lay ahead. There, by the big cottonwood tree near the water's edge, was definitely a person. A very large person lying face down in the mud. As she got closer, her heart started beating faster for a different reason. This wasn't one of her neighbors. The man was huge, broader than any settler she'd ever seen. His long black hair was plastered to his head, and he wore clothes she recognized as Apache. Rebecca stopped walking. Every instinct told her to turn around and go back to the house. The Apache and the settlers had been having troubles for years. There had been raids and fights, and people on both sides had died. Finding an Apache warrior on her land could mean serious danger. But as she stood there in the pouring rain, staring at the motionless figure, she saw something that changed her mind. Blood. Dark stains mixed with the mud around his body. Whatever had brought this man to her creek, he was badly injured and might be dying. She couldn't walk away from a dying person, not even an Apache warrior. Rebecca set the lamp down carefully and tried to roll the man onto his back. He was incredibly heavy, like trying to move a fallen tree. It took all her strength just to get him turned over. His face was strong and angular, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. A nasty cut ran along his forehead, still bleeding despite the rain washing over it. He couldn't be much older than her own 28 years, but his face had the kind of lines that came from hard living and loss. He was breathing, but barely. She needed to get him out of the rain and tend to his wounds, but there was no way she could carry him to the house. The barn would have to do. It took her nearly an hour to drag him across the muddy ground to the barn. She had to stop every few feet to rest and catch her breath. By the time she got him inside, she was exhausted and soaked to the bone. The barn was dry and warm compared to the storm outside. She made a bed of clean hay and managed to roll him onto it. Then she ran back to the house to get medical supplies and dry blankets. When she returned with her arms full of bandages and herbs, she found him exactly as she'd left him. still unconscious, still bleeding, but his breathing seemed a little stronger. Rebecca had learned basic doctoring from her mother, who'd been the closest thing to a nurse their small settlement had. She'd patched up Thomas more times than she could count after his various accidents around the ranch. She cleaned the head wound first. It was deep, but not life-threatening. The real problem was a bullet wound in his shoulder. Someone had shot this man, and recently. The wound was still fresh, probably from earlier that day. As she worked, she found herself studying his face. Even unconscious and injured, there was something peaceful about him. His features were strong, but not cruel. His hands, when she checked them for other injuries, were calloused from hard work but gentle-looking. She'd heard terrible stories about Apache warriors. People in town talked about them like they were monsters, savages who lived only for violence and revenge. But looking at this man, all she saw was someone who was hurt and vulnerable, just like any other person would be. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, which was good news. Rebecca cleaned the wound as best she could and packed it with healing herbs her mother had taught her about. Then she wrapped it tight with clean cloth. While she worked, the storm continued to rage outside. The sound of rain on the barn roof was actually comforting now, like nature's own lullaby. She found herself relaxing for the first time in months. When she finished bandaging his wounds, she covered him with thick blankets and settled down to wait. There wasn't much more she could do until he woke up. If he woke up. She must have dozed off in the hay beside him because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the barn walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind the sweet smell of rain-washed earth. Rebecca sat up and immediately looked at her patient. His eyes were open, staring directly at her. She gasped and scrambled backward, her heart hammering in her chest. Those eyes were the darkest brown she'd ever seen, almost black, and they were watching her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight into her soul. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She was afraid to breathe too, loudly. He was studying her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then he spoke, and his voice was nothing like she'd expected. It was deep and warm, with only a slight accent. "You saved my life." It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement. A fact spoken in perfect English. Rebecca found her voice. "You were hurt. I couldn't just leave you there." He tried to sit up, then winced and fell back against the hay. "The bullet?" "Went clean through. You'll heal, but you need to rest." He nodded slowly, still watching her with those intense dark eyes. "Why did you help me? Your people and mine. We are not friends." It was a fair question. Rebecca had been asking herself the same thing. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just couldn't walk away." Something changed in his expression. The wariness didn't disappear completely, but it softened around the edges. "My name is Ayana. It means eternal blossom in my language. I'm Rebecca." She paused, then added, "This is my ranch. My husband's ranch, I mean. He died a few months ago. I am sorry for your loss. Grief is a heavy burden to carry alone." There was something in the way he said it that made her look at him more carefully. This wasn't just polite sympathy. This man knew what loss felt like. "You've lost someone too," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "My wife and daughter. Soldiers came to our camp 2 winters ago. They said we were harboring raiders, but we were peaceful people. They didn't care." The pain in his voice was raw and fresh, even after 2 years. Rebecca felt an unexpected kinship with this stranger. They were both alone in the world, both carrying wounds that went deeper than anything that could be bandaged. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once, then closed his eyes. "I should go. My presence here puts you in danger. You can barely sit up, let alone travel. Besides, where would you go? There are cavalry patrols all over this area." Ayana opened his eyes again. "You know about the patrols?" "Of course. Captain Morrison has been riding through here twice a week, looking for people like you, I suppose. Then you understand why I cannot stay. If they find me here, they won't," Rebecca interrupted. The storm washed away any tracks you might have left. And Morrison never searches buildings, just rides through checking that everything looks normal. She surprised herself with how quickly she'd made the decision to hide him. A week ago, if someone had told her she'd be sheltering an Apache warrior in her barn, she'd have laughed at them. Ayanna was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, he said, "Why are you doing this? You could turn me in and probably get a reward." Rebecca considered the question. "I could, but I won't. Because you are a good person." She shook her head. "I don't know about that. Maybe I'm just tired of being alone." It was more honest. 3 days passed like a strange dream. Rebecca found herself living 2 completely different lives. During the day, she played the part of a struggling widow trying to keep her ranch together. She mended fences, fed the chickens that had survived the storm, and tried to make her small herd of cattle think she knew what she was doing. But when evening came and the sun disappeared behind the mountains, her real life began. That's when she would slip out to the barn with food, fresh bandages, and oil for the lamp that lit their secret world. Ayanna was healing faster than she'd expected. Apache were tough people, she was learning. His shoulder still pained him, but he could move around the barn without too much difficulty. More importantly, the fever that had worried her the first night was completely gone. They talked while she changed his bandages. At first, their conversations were careful and polite, like 2 strangers meeting at church. But gradually, as trust grew between them, they began sharing deeper truths. "Tell me about your husband," Ayanna said one evening as she cleaned his wound. His English was nearly perfect, with just enough of an accent to remind her that he came from a different world. Rebecca paused in her work. Nobody had asked her about Thomas in months. People in town seemed to think that mentioning him would make her cry, so they avoided the subject entirely. "He was older than me," she said finally. 20 years older. "My father arranged the marriage when I was 19. You did not choose him yourself?" "Women don't usually get to choose in my world, not unless they're very lucky or very rich." She tied off the bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. "Thomas wasn't cruel. He never saw me as anything more than someone to cook his meals and mend his clothes." Ayanna was quiet for a moment. "In my tribe, marriages are usually arranged too, but both the man and woman must agree. No one can be forced." "That sounds better than our way. My wife and we were promised to each other as children, but we grew up together, became friends first. When we married, we chose each other again with our hearts." There was such tenderness in his voice when he spoke of her. Rebecca felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, which surprised her. "What was her name?" "Itzel. It means rainbow in our language." She was small and quick, always laughing. She could make beautiful pottery and knew every plant in the desert that could heal or harm. "She sounds wonderful." She was. "And our daughter, Suki, was just beginning to walk when—" He stopped, his jaw tightening with old pain. Rebecca reached out without thinking and touched his hand. "You don't have to talk about it if it hurts too much." But Ayanna didn't pull away from her touch. Instead, he turned his palm up and briefly clasped her fingers. It helps to speak of them sometimes, to know that someone else remembers they existed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, her hand still in his. Rebecca was acutely aware of how different his skin looked against hers, how much larger his fingers were, how warm his palm felt. She should pull away, but she didn't want to. "What about you?" Ayanna asked softly. "Did you ever want children?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She did pull her hand back then, turning away so he couldn't see her face. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "That was too personal." "No, it's all right." She took a shaky breath. "I wanted children very much, but it never happened. Thomas said it was because I was too thin, not strong enough. The doctor in town agreed with him. Doctors can be wrong. Maybe. But it doesn't matter now. You are still young. You could marry again, have the family you wanted." Rebecca almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Who would want to marry a widow with debts and a failing ranch? Besides, I told you, women in my world don't usually get to choose." "Then your world needs to change." Something in the way he said it made her look at him. There was an intensity in his dark eyes that made her heart beat faster. "Some things can't be changed," she said quietly. "Everything can be changed. Sometimes it just takes courage." Their conversations weren't always so serious. Ayana had a sense of humor that surprised her. He told her stories about his childhood, about the time he tried to catch a roadrunner and ended up covered in cactus spines, or the day he attempted to impress a girl by showing off on horseback and fell face first into a muddy creek. In return, Rebecca found herself sharing memories she'd never told another soul. Like how she used to sneak out of her father's house to ride her horse bareback across the prairie, feeling free as a bird, or how she'd taught herself to read by studying her mother's Bible, even though her father thought education was wasted on girls. "You would have made a good teacher," Ayana said after hearing about her love of books. Thomas didn't approve of reading, said it gave women ideas above their station. "What kind of ideas?" Rebecca smiled. "Ideas about how life could be different, better. Those sound like good ideas to me." As the days passed, Ayana began helping with small tasks around the barn. He couldn't do heavy labor with his injured shoulder, but he could mend tack, organize tools, and feed the animals. Rebecca protested at first, worried about his wounds, but he insisted he felt stronger when he was useful. She had to admit it was nice having help, even in such a limited way. Thomas had never been much for conversation while they worked, but Ayana seemed to enjoy talking while his hands stayed busy. "Where did you learn to speak English so well?" she asked one evening as they worked together to repair a broken bridle. "Mission school. The priests took me when I was 8 years old, said they would teach me to live in the white man's world." "You didn't want to go?" Ayana's hands stilled on the leather. "I was too young to understand what they wanted to take from me. They cut my hair, made me wear their clothes, forbade me to speak my own language. They said my people's ways were savage and wrong." Rebecca heard the pain in his voice. "But you went back to your tribe?" "When I was 16, I ran away. It took me weeks to find my people again. My mother cried when she saw me. She thought the priests had killed me." "Did you regret learning their ways?" "No. Knowledge is never a bad thing, even when it comes from people who mean you harm. The English language has been useful. Understanding how white settlers think has helped my people avoid conflicts. Until now." "Until now," he agreed grimly. Rebecca wanted to ask what had brought him to her land, what kind of trouble he was running from, but she sensed it was dangerous knowledge. The less she knew about his problems, the safer they both were. On the 4th night, everything changed. Rebecca was bringing Ayana his dinner when she noticed him standing by the barn window, staring out at something in the darkness. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders. Coming fast." Rebecca's blood chilled. She blew out the oil lamp immediately and joined him at the window. In the moonlight, she could see 3 horsemen approaching at a gallop. "Cavalry?" Ayana asked softly. "I don't think so. Wrong time of night for a patrol." She squinted at the approaching figures. "I think it's Jake Mitchell and his sons again." "In the middle of the night?" That's not like them at all. A terrible thought occurred to her. Unless they know something. The riders pulled up in front of her house with a thunder of hoofbeats. Rebecca could hear shouting, though she couldn't make out the words from this distance. "I have to go see what they want," she said. "Stay hidden." "Rebecca." Ayana caught her arm as she headed for the door. "Be careful. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong." She tried to sound more confident than she felt. "If it does, run. Don't try to protect me." She looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern for her safety, not for himself, but for her. When was the last time anyone had worried about her welfare? "I'll be careful," she promised. Rebecca slipped out of the barn and walked quickly toward the house. The riders had dismounted and were pounding on her front door hard enough to wake the dead. "I'm coming," she called out, trying to sound sleepy, and annoyed rather than terrified. She opened the door to find Jake Mitchell with his 2 sons, just as she'd expected. But something was very wrong. All three men were disheveled and wild-eyed, and Jake was holding a rifle. "Jake? What's wrong? What are you doing here at this hour?" "We need to search your property," Jake said without preamble. "Search for what?" "Apache. Raiders hit the Hendricks place tonight. Burned the house, stole their horses. We're tracking them." Rebecca's heart sank. The Hendricks ranch was only 5 miles away. If there really had been a raid. "I haven't seen anyone," she said, "and I would have heard horses if they'd come this way." "Maybe. Maybe not." Jake pushed past her into the house. "Tom, check the bedrooms. Will, you take the kitchen and back room." "You can't just barge into my home," Rebecca protested. "We can," and we are. "If you're hiding something, we'll find it." The two sons spread out through the house, overturning furniture and opening every door and closet. Rebecca stood in her kitchen trying to stay calm while her world fell apart around her. They found nothing in the house, of course. But when they finished there, Jake headed straight for the door. "Now we check the barn. There's nothing in the barn but my horse and some chickens. Then you won't mind if we look." There was no way to stop them without making them more suspicious. Rebecca followed the three men across the yard, her mind racing frantically. Maybe Ayanna had heard them, coming and found a place to hide, maybe. Jake threw open the barn door and stepped inside with his rifle ready. His sons flanked him, also armed. Tom, check dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Rebecca had spent the night tied to a chair in her own kitchen, watched over by Will Mitchell while his father and brother slept in shifts on her front porch. Her wrists were raw from the rope and her back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. But she was alive, and more importantly, Ayanna was still free. Jake walked into the kitchen just as the sun cleared the mountains. His face was grim, and Rebecca could tell he hadn't slept much either. "Time to go," he announced, pulling out a long knife to cut her bonds. Rebecca's hands tingled painfully as blood flowed back into them. "Where are you taking me?" "Sheriff's office in town. You can wait there for the judge to decide what to do with you." Rebecca knew what the judge would decide. Judge Patterson was a hard man who believed the only good Apache was a dead Apache. He wouldn't show mercy to a woman who'd sheltered one. Will had saddled her horse and brought it around to the front of the house. As they prepared to leave, Tom came running from the direction of the canyon. "Pa, the tracks just end at the rocks," like he vanished into thin air. Jake swore under his breath. "Apache know how to hide their trail. He's long gone by now." But Rebecca noticed how Jake kept glancing toward the hills as they rode away from her ranch. He wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. The ride to town took 2 hours. Rebecca found herself memorizing every detail of the landscape, wondering if she'd ever see her home again. The morning was beautiful, with wildflowers blooming along, the trail and birds singing in the cottonwood trees. It seemed wrong that such a perfect day should be the one that ended her freedom. As they crested the hill overlooking the settlement, Rebecca saw a crowd gathered in the main street. Word of her capture had spread quickly, and it looked like half the town had come out to see the woman who'd been harboring an Apache warrior. Sheriff Coleman was waiting for them at the jail. He was a decent man, unlike some of the others Rebecca had dealt with, but he was also a man who followed the law without question. "Morning, Jake," he said as they dismounted. "I hear you found our Apache sympathizer." "Found evidence of him at her place," Jake replied. "The warrior himself got away, but we've got the next best thing." Sheriff Coleman looked at Rebecca with something that might have been pity. "I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Henderson. I truly am. But the law is the law." Rebecca said nothing as he led her into the jail. What was there to say? She was guilty of exactly what they accused her of. The cell was small and stuffy, with a narrow cot and a bucket for water. As the iron door clanged shut behind her, Rebecca felt the walls closing in around her future. "Judge Patterson will be here day after tomorrow," Sheriff Coleman said through the bars. "Until then, you just try to rest easy." Rest easy. As if that were possible when she was facing a death sentence. The crowd outside the jail grew larger as the day wore on. Rebecca could hear them talking, their voices carrying through the small window high up on the cell wall. Most of them seemed convinced she was guilty, but a few people defended her. Rebecca Henderson is a good woman, she heard Mrs. Morrison say. There must be some other explanation. Good women don't take up with savages, another voice replied. She got what she deserved. As evening approached, the crowd finally dispersed. Rebecca was alone with her thoughts for the first time since her arrest. She found herself thinking about Ayanna, wondering where he was and whether he was safe. Part of her hoped he'd already rejoined his people and put as much distance as possible between himself and this place. But another part of her, a part she was ashamed to acknowledge, hoped he hadn't forgotten her entirely. The sun was setting when she heard a soft tapping on the wall behind her cot. At first she thought it might be mice in the walls. Then she heard it again. 3 short taps, 2 long ones, 3 short again. It was a pattern. A message. Rebecca pressed her ear to the wall and listened carefully. The tapping came again, and this time she was certain it was deliberate. Someone was on the other side of the wall trying to communicate with her. "Ayanna?" she whispered, barely making any sound at all. The tapping stopped. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, came his voice. "I am here." Rebecca's heart leaped. "How?" "The old mineshaft behind the jail. It connects to the building's foundation." She should have told him to go away, to save himself while he still could. Instead, she found herself whispering, "They're taking me to Judge Patterson day after tomorrow." "I know." I heard them talking. A long pause. Then, "Rebecca, do you trust me?" It was a strange question under the circumstances. She was in jail because she'd trusted him. Her life was forfeit because she'd trusted him. By all logic, trusting him further would be the height of foolishness. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Then be ready tomorrow night. When the church bell strikes midnight, be at this wall." Ready for what? But there was no answer. Ayanna had gone as silently as he'd come. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Sheriff Coleman brought her meals and checked on her regularly, but he said little beyond what was necessary. Rebecca could see the guilt in his eyes. He didn't like jailing a woman, especially one who'd never caused trouble before. As the sun set on what might be her last day of freedom, Rebecca began to pace her small cell. Whatever Ayanna was planning, it would have to happen soon. Once Judge Patterson arrived, her fate would be sealed. The town grew quiet as people settled in for the night. Rebecca sat on her cot, straining her ears for any sound that might tell her what was happening outside. Just before midnight, she heard the soft scraping of metal against stone. Someone was working at the wall behind her cot. The church bell began to toll 12, its deep notes echoing across the sleeping town. On the final stroke, a section of the wall swung inward like a hidden door. Ayanna squeezed through the opening, moving with the fluid grace of a man born to stealth. Even in the dim light filtering through the cell window, Rebecca could see he was fully healed from his wounds. "We must hurry," he whispered, helping her through the opening into the old mine. "Tunnel. How did you—" "This mine was abandoned 20 years ago. The tunnels go for miles underground. Your jail was built over part of the old system." They crawled through the narrow tunnel for what felt like hours, following passages that twisted and turned through solid rock. Ayanna led the way with a small oil lamp, never hesitating at the various branches and intersections. Finally, they emerged into the cool night air near the river, more than a mile from town. Ayanna's horse was waiting, along with a second mount Rebecca recognized as one from her own small herd. "How did you get my horse?" "I never left your ranch," Ayanna said as he helped her into the saddle. "I have been watching from the hills, waiting for the right moment." They rode hard through the night, following trails that Rebecca didn't know existed. Ayanna seemed to know every rock and tree, every hidden path through the wilderness. As dawn broke, they stopped to rest by a small stream deep in the mountains. Rebecca slid from her horse, her legs shaking from exhaustion and the aftermath of fear. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My people have a hidden camp in the high country. You will be safe there." "For how long? I can never go back to my old life now." Ayanna was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Is that what you want? Your old life? Rebecca considered the question. Her old life had been lonely and hard, full of struggle and sorrow. She'd been slowly dying inside, going through the motions of living without really being alive. No, she said finally. I don't want my old life back. Something shifted in Ayana's expression. What do you want? It was the question she'd been afraid to ask herself. What did she want? For the first time in her adult life, she was free to choose her own path. I want to be with you, she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge she'd never be able to cross back over. She'd said it now, admitted the feeling she'd been fighting for days. Ayana stepped closer to her. Rebecca, you must understand what that means. My people live very differently from yours, and if we are together, you can never return to the white world. They will consider you dead to them. I know. You would give up everything, your home, your culture, your people? Rebecca thought about her empty house, her mountain of debts, the neighbors who'd been so quick to judge her. What was she really giving up? What home? She asked. What people? The only person who cared whether I lived or died was you. Ayana reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I care very much whether you live or die. I know. I could see it in your eyes that first morning when you looked at me. No one had looked at me that way in years. What way? Like I mattered. Like I was worth something. His hand slid to the back of her neck and he drew her closer. You are worth everything to me. When he kissed her, it was like the sun coming up after the longest night of her life. Gentle at first, then deeper as she responded to him. She could taste the promise of a different future on his lips. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Are you certain? Ayana asked. Once we go to my people, there is no changing your mind. I'm certain. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Then I have something to tell you. What? The night I found you by. 3 weeks had passed since Rebecca joined Ayana's people in their hidden mountain camp. 3 weeks of the happiest days she'd ever known. She was learning to weave baskets from young willow branches, to prepare traditional foods, and to speak basic words in Ayana's language. The women of the tribe had welcomed her with surprising warmth, teaching her their ways with patience and good humor. Ayana's grandmother, who everyone called Nokomis, seemed especially pleased with Rebecca's progress. You have good hands, the old woman said one morning as they worked together preparing deer hide. And a good heart. The spirits chose well for my grandson. Rebecca smiled as she worked the soft leather. I never imagined I could be so happy. Happiness is like water. In the desert, Nokomis replied. Precious because it is rare, but also dangerous because it makes us forget to watch for enemies. The words sent a small chill through Rebecca, but she pushed the feeling away. Here in this peaceful valley, surrounded by people who'd accepted her as family, it was hard to believe that danger could touch them. Ayana had been gone for 2 days, scouting the lower trails with several other warriors. They did this regularly, watching for signs of soldiers or settlers who might discover their camp. He was due back that evening, and Rebecca found herself listening for the sound of horses returning. As the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, she heard the lookouts calling, riders approaching fast, too fast for a normal patrol. Rebecca joined the other women at the edge of the camp, straining to see through the gathering dusk. When the riders came into view, her heart sank. There were only 3 of them, not the 5 who had left 2 days ago. Ayana was among them, but she could see immediately that something was terribly wrong. He was slumped forward in his saddle, and dark stains covered his shirt. The men rode straight to the medicine lodge, where Nokomis was already waiting with her healing supplies. Rebecca ran after them, fear clawing at her chest. What happened? She asked as the warriors helped Ayana down from his horse. Ambush, one of them replied grimly. Soldiers were waiting at Devil's Canyon. We lost Running Bear and White Hawk. Rebecca's heart ached for the fallen warriors, but her immediate concern was for Ayanna. The dark stains on his shirt were blood, and there was a lot of it. Inside the medicine lodge, Nokomis took charge with calm efficiency. "Rebecca, fetch clean water and more bandages, quickly." As Rebecca hurried to help, she listened to the warriors' report. A cavalry patrol led by Captain Morrison had been tracking them for days, following signs so old that no one expected danger. The soldiers had set up an ambush at the narrow canyon where the trail bottomed out near the river. They knew exactly where we would be, one warrior said bitterly. "Someone told them our route. Or they've been watching us longer than we realized," Ayanna said through gritted teeth as Nokomis cleaned his wounds. Rebecca saw that he'd been shot twice, once in the leg and once in the side. Neither wound looked immediately fatal, but he'd lost a lot of blood. "How did you escape?" she asked. "Running Bear and Whitehawk stayed behind to cover our retreat. They saved our lives." The grief in his voice was raw. Rebecca knew those men, had been like brothers to him. As Nokomis worked to stop the bleeding, the camp's war chief, a stern man named Grey Wolf, came to the lodge. "We cannot stay here," he announced. "If the soldiers found our trail to Devil's Canyon, they will find this place too." "Ayanna cannot travel," Nokomis protested. "Not for days." "Then he stays behind with a small group while the rest of us move to the winter camp." "No." Ayanna tried to sit up, then fell back with a gasp of pain. "We all go together, or we don't." "Go at all?" "You are not thinking clearly," Grey Wolf said, not unkindly. "Your wounds will heal. But if we split up now, the soldiers will pick us off piece by piece." It was an old argument between the two men, Rebecca realized. Grey Wolf favored caution and strategic retreats. Ayanna believed their only chance was to stay united, even when it meant greater risks. "There is another problem," one of the scouts said quietly. "The soldiers are not just hunting us, they have orders to find the white woman." All eyes turned to Rebecca. She felt her stomach drop. "They mentioned her by name?" Grey Wolf asked. "Captain Morrison called her the Henderson woman. He offered a reward for information leading to her capture." Rebecca closed her eyes. She'd known this day would come, but she'd hoped for more time. "I have to leave," she said quietly. "No." Ayanna's voice was weak but fierce. "We stay together. If I stay, I put everyone in danger. They're hunting for me specifically. And if you leave, you walk into their hands," Grey Wolf pointed out. "Either way, the result is the same." But Rebecca was already making plans. There was a third option, one that none of them would like. "Not if I go back willingly," she said. The lodge fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. "What do you mean?" Nokomis asked. "If I turn myself in, tell them I was taken captive and escaped, maybe they'll believe me. Maybe they'll stop looking for the camp." "They will never believe such a story," Grey Wolf said flatly. "They might if I play it right. Say I was captured during the raid on the Hendricks place, held prisoner for weeks, finally managed to get away." Ayanna struggled to sit up again. "Rebecca, no, they will hang you." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll see me as a victim instead of a criminal." It was a slim hope, but it was the only chance she could see to protect the people who'd become her family. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for us," Ayanna said. Rebecca knelt beside his bed and took his hand. "You sacrificed everything to save me. Let me return the favor." "That is different." "How is it different?" He couldn't answer that, and they both knew it. Nokomis had been listening quietly to the debate. Now she spoke up. "There may be another way," the old woman said slowly. Everyone turned to her. What if Rebecca was taken by a different band of Apache? A group from far to the south, who have since moved on. Rebecca frowned. "I don't understand." "You tell the soldiers that you were captured by raiders from the Chiricahua band, held prisoner for weeks while they traveled south toward Mexico. You escaped when they stopped to rest near the border and made your way north on foot." Grey Wolf nodded thoughtfully. "It could work. The Chiricahua are already blamed for most of the raids in this territory. One more would not surprise anyone. And it would explain why you know so little about where you were held." Nokomis continued. "You were kept blindfolded most of the time, moved frequently, never allowed to see landmarks. It was a better plan than Rebecca's first idea, but still incredibly dangerous. What if they don't believe me? Then you are no worse off than you would have been anyway, Grey Wolf said pragmatically. Ayana was shaking his head. Too many things could go wrong. One wrong detail, one question you cannot answer. Then teach me what I need to know, Rebecca said. Tell me about the Chiricahua, their customs, their territory. Give me enough truth to make the lies believable. They spent the rest of the night preparing Rebecca for her deception. Ayana, despite his injuries, insisted on coaching her personally. He described the landscape of southern Arizona, the names of Chiricahua leaders, the kinds of food they ate and clothes they wore. Remember, he said, as dawn approached, you were terrified most of the time. It is natural that many details would be unclear in your memory. Rebecca nodded, trying to commit everything to memory. Her life would depend on getting this performance exactly right. As the sun rose, it was time for her to go. The plan was for her to make her way to the main trail and then toward town, where she would accidentally encounter a patrol or settlement. Ayana tried once more to stop her. Please, he whispered, holding her hand tight. Do not do this. We will find another way. There is no other way, Rebecca said gently. We both know it. I cannot lose you. Not now. Rebecca's heart was breaking, but she forced herself to stay strong. You won't lose me. I'll find a way back to you, I promise. How? If this plan works, they will never let you out of their sight again. She didn't have an answer for that. Maybe there was no way back. Maybe this really was goodbye forever. Take care of our son, she said softly. Ayana looked confused. What son? Rebecca smiled through her tears. The one your grandmother promised me. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back, remember that I would have loved him. Before Ayana could respond, she kissed him one last time and walked away. If she stayed any longer, she'd lose her courage entirely. The hardest part was walking out of the camp without looking back. She could feel the eyes of Ayana's people on her. People who'd welcomed her as family, who'd taught her their ways with patience and kindness. People she was now leaving behind, possibly forever. It took her most of the morning to reach the main trail. She'd deliberately chosen a route that would make her look like she'd been traveling for days on foot. Her clothes were torn from bushes, her face and hands scratched and dirty. The first patrol found her just before noon. Hold it right there, a soldier called out, raising his rifle. Rebecca stumbled and fell to her knees, playing the part of an exhausted escapee. Please, she gasped, help me. I've been walking for days. The patrol leader, a young lieutenant she didn't recognize, approached cautiously. Who are you? What are you doing out here alone? Rebecca Henderson. I was taken by Apache raiders weeks ago. I just escaped. The lieutenant's eyes widened. Henderson? You're the woman Captain Morrison has been looking for. Captain Morrison? Captain Morrison looked older than Rebecca remembered. His face was weathered and tired, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights hunting enemies in the wilderness. He sat across from her in the sheriff's office, studying her carefully while she told her carefully rehearsed story. She was a woman who'd been captured by Chiricahua Apache, held prisoner for weeks, and finally managed to escape during the chaos of a river crossing. And you remember nothing about the location of their camp? Morrison asked for the third time. I told you they kept me blindfolded most of the time. When they did remove it, we were always moving. Desert, mountains, more desert. It all looked the same to me. Rebecca kept her voice steady, but inside she was terrified. One wrong detail, one question she couldn't answer convincingly, and everything would fall apart. What about their leader? Did you see him? A tall man with scars on his chest. He spoke, some English but not much. The others called him. Rebecca pretended to search her memory. Something like Broken Lance. It was the name of a real Chiricahua war chief, one Ayana had mentioned during their night of preparation. someone far enough away that Morrison couldn't easily verify her story. The captain made notes on a piece of paper. "And you escaped how?" "We're crossing a river. The current was strong and one of their horses stumbled. In the confusion, I slipped my bonds and ran into the brush. They searched for me, but it was getting dark." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "That's quite a story, Mrs. Henderson." "It's the truth." "Maybe it is, but it still doesn't explain how you ended up in jail in the first place." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. This was the dangerous part of her deception. "I'm sorry?" "Jake Mitchell found evidence of Apache presence at your ranch. A warrior's vest hidden in your barn. How do you explain that?" Rebecca forced herself to look confused. "I don't remember any vest. Maybe the raiders left it there when they took me." "You don't remember being arrested?" "Captain, I've been through a terrible ordeal. There are gaps in my memory, especially from the day I was taken. The doctor says that's normal after a traumatic experience." It was partly true. The town doctor had examined her when the patrol brought her in, and he'd confirmed that physical and emotional trauma could indeed cause memory problems. Morrison studied her face for a long moment. Finally, he sighed and closed his notebook. "All right, Mrs. Henderson. For now, I'm inclined to believe your story. You've certainly been through enough." Rebecca felt weak with relief, but she was careful not to show it. "However," Morrison continued, "I'm posting a guard at your ranch for the next few weeks, just to make sure these Chiricahua don't come back looking for you." A guard. That would make it impossible for Ayanna to contact her, even if he tried. "Is he? That really necessary?" she asked. "I'm afraid so. Your safety is my responsibility now." Rebecca nodded, accepting the inevitable. At least she was free, and more importantly, she'd successfully diverted suspicion away from Ayanna's people. The ride back to her ranch felt like traveling through a graveyard. Everything looked the same as when she'd left, but it all felt dead and empty now. The house that had once been her prison now felt like her entire world. True to his word, Morrison stationed 2 soldiers at her property. They set up camp near the barn and made it clear they intended to watch her every move. "Just temporary, ma'am," the sergeant assured her. "Until the captain is satisfied you're safe." Rebecca settled back into her old routine, but it was like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. She fed the chickens, tended her small garden, and tried to repair the storm damage that was still scattered around her property. But her heart wasn't in it. At night she would lie in her empty bed and stare at the ceiling, remembering what it felt like to sleep in Ayanna's arms under a canopy of stars. She wondered if he was thinking of her too, somewhere in the high country, with his people. 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Then, on a morning when the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall, Rebecca discovered something that changed everything. She'd been feeling sick for several days, unable to keep food down, and exhausted even after a full night's sleep. She'd assumed it was the lingering effects of stress and poor eating during her time away. But as she sat on the edge of her bed, fighting another wave of nausea, the truth hit her like lightning. She was pregnant. Rebecca pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, hardly daring to believe it. But the signs were all there. The sickness, the exhaustion, the strange sensitivity to smells that had developed over the past week. Nokomis had been right. By winter, she would have Ayanna's son growing inside her. The knowledge filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. Joy because she was carrying the child of the man she loved, the family she'd always dreamed of. Terror because she was facing it alone, with no way to tell Ayanna about his coming son. Rebecca walked to her window and looked out toward the mountains where he was hidden. Somewhere out there was the father of her child, probably believing he'd never see her again. She had to find a way to let him know. That night, as the guards sat around their campfire, Rebecca slipped out her back door and made her way to the old oak tree near the creek. It was the same tree where she'd first found Ayanna bleeding in the mud after the storm. She left a small pile of stones arranged in a specific pattern, a signal Ayanna had taught her during their time together. It meant message follows in the silent language of his people. Then she returned to the house and waited. 3 nights later, the stones had been rearranged into a different pattern. Someone had received her signal and was ready to communicate. Rebecca began leaving messages hidden in a hollow of the old tree. Simple notes written on bark, telling Ayana about her situation and the soldiers watching her. She didn't dare mention her pregnancy yet. Such news was too precious and dangerous to trust to hidden messages. The responses came irregularly, sometimes days apart. They were written in a mixture of English and Apache symbols, brief and cautious. But they told her everything she needed to know. Ayana was alive and healing. His people were safe in their winter camp, and he was working on a plan to see her again. October passed in this strange double life. During the day, Rebecca played the part of a recovering captive under military protection. At night, she maintained her secret communication with the man she loved. The morning sickness was getting worse, and Rebecca knew she couldn't hide her condition much longer. Soon her body would begin to show the changes, and people would start asking questions she couldn't answer. She needed to see Ayana soon, before it became impossible to travel. The answer came on a cold November morning when Captain Morrison rode up to her ranch with news. "Mrs. Henderson, I have good news," he announced as he dismounted. "We've had reports that the Chiricahua band that captured you has moved south into Mexico. You should be safe now." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "Does that mean you're removing the guards?" "Not immediately, but in a week or so, yes, I think we can consider the threat over." It was the opening she'd been praying for. That night she left a message in the tree. "Guards leaving soon. Meet me at the old mine cabin on the first night of the new moon." The old mine cabin was the abandoned prospector's shack about 5 miles from her ranch in a canyon that would provide cover for a secret meeting. Ayana's response came the next day. "Too dangerous. Soldiers still patrol." Rebecca wrote back, "I must see you. I have news." The next morning she found his reply. "What news?" Rebecca stared at the message for a long time, then wrote the words that would change both their lives forever. "You are going to be a father." 2 days later, the guards packed up and left. Rebecca waited until they were completely out of sight, then saddled her horse and rode toward the canyon. The old mine cabin was exactly as she remembered it. A tumble-down shack clinging to the side of a rocky hill, surrounded by abandoned mining equipment and tailings piles. Ayana was waiting for her. He looked thinner than when she'd left him, and there were new lines of worry around his eyes. But when he saw her, his whole face lit up with joy. Rebecca slid down from her horse and ran to him. He caught her in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "I thought I would never see you again," he whispered against her hair. "I promised I would find a way back to you." He held her at arm's length, studying her face. "You look different. Tired. I've been sick in the mornings. The baby. It is true? You are certain?" Rebecca nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "Your grandmother was right. By winter I'll have your son growing inside me." Ayana's hands moved to her stomach with reverent gentleness. "How long?" 2 months, I think. Maybe a little more." He pulled her close again, and Rebecca could feel the emotion shaking through him. "I have been going crazy," he said, "not knowing if you were safe, if your plan had worked." It worked. Morrison believes I was captured by the Chiricahua. He's not looking for your people anymore. Good. That is good. He paused. "But what about us? What about the baby?" It was the question Rebecca had been dreading. What future could they possibly have now? "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't disappear again without raising suspicions, and you can't exactly come courting at my front door." Ayana was